Hey everybody, it's Dave with No Chaser, and today's topic is about alcoholics, addicts, and stigma, and why, in some sense, it will never end. Now, with me saying that, I'm totally aware that it has definitely gotten better as time has gone on. And this is not, look, I'm an alcoholic and an addict. I'm not here to talk shit or make you feel bad or anything like that. And I'm not saying I agree with stigma or anything. However, the point of this video is that I think there are some things that it's important to be aware of when it's concerning society and us as a whole. So let me illustrate that with a little experience I had. I was in a meeting one time, and there was a guy talking about when he thought life was unfair. He told himself, well, you know what? You're lucky life is unfair. You're lucky you didn't get what you deserved. Which that's a sentiment I've heard, many times before, and I get it. It's a lot of people use this as a sense to be grateful for the life that they have in recovery. But there's always a part of me when someone says something like that where I'm like, get what we deserve. Is this a disease or not? Because that's the one thing that always happens with the idea of addiction being disease, is that we can know it on some conceptual level. I totally agree with the disease model of addiction. It has a ton of merit, but I don't really believe it in here. And I'm not just talking about other people believing it. I mean, alcoholics and addicts not believing it. And you can tell by the huge amount of shame and guilt they have. And a lot of times, if they're in long-term recovery, they will process it. But they were feeling it for a long time. And if they were to do it again, because they relapsed, they would super feel it. Now, the argument could be that, well, it was up to them to treat their disease, I agree with that too. But here's the thing. I received a huge amount of support from people when they found out I was an alcoholic and an addict in recovery. More recently, I came out on my personal social media about being in recovery. And again, just a wave of support from people. No shit talking whatsoever. I don't even know, I've had stigma in kind of indirect ways, but never really just directly at me. However, the key word in there was recovery, an alcoholic or an addict in recovery. So a lot of people that aren't alcoholics and addicts, a lot of times in their mind they equate that to an ex-alcoholic or addict. And as we may know, that's not really the case, but they're proud of us, they're rooting you on, and they're glad that you are no longer acting like an alcoholic or an addict. Because here's the thing. The reason why I say there will always be some stigma is that human beings will always be human beings. Because the thing I always say is that I know that being an alcoholic and addict, that if I was like, dude, I have all the sympathy and empathy, feeling what being in their shoes in the world for addicts and alcoholics. However, if I were to walk out to my car and someone busted my window and stole my wallet, I would be like, fuck them. And maybe that would subside. However, that would subside because I've been in their shoes before. Now, asking normal people to do that is much different. And here's the other thing. The disease of addiction, its symptoms are certain behaviors. And these behaviors, this isn't behaviors like the other diseases you talk about, like lupus or shit. This is being destructive, stealing, lying, being incredibly selfish. You're acting like a sociopath when you're not a sociopath. And saying you're going through, this is my disease. People are like, no. It's a disease when you get better. Right now, I hope you rot in jail. And on a more serious note, we also kill people when we drive and drink. And I've seen many cases where the parents of somebody that was killed do come to forgive the person, right? And it's incredibly touching, and it shows you some of the triumphs of the human spirit. But that's the thing. The key word is forgive them. It is recognizing their sin. Because a lot of times, what people will say is that I was not a bad person getting better. I was a sick person getting well, right? Because it is a disease. But in the eyes of most people that aren't addicts and alcoholics, we are seen more as sinners that have reformed. We have rehabilitated ourselves. But it is not lost on me. One thing I've said over and over again in all the videos I've done, even from the very first one, is that I have a tremendous amount of sympathy and empathy for somebody that loves or is connected to a person in active addiction. It is incredibly stressful, and it's difficult to be with us when we're in active addiction because of what it does to us. And there will always be, so here's the thing, I think it's important to realize what I mean by stigma, is that stigma, when it comes down to it, is talking about a behavior or a way of being or an identity that is seen with disgrace. Now, let's look at this in another frame of life to compare. You talk about the stigma of homosexuality, the stigma of being gay. That has gotten better over the years too, but it's still there. And some people on a religious level believe it's a sin. I'm not even going to get into that. But like for me, I don't think the onus is on them to destigmatize themselves, in a sense, because I don't see anything disgraceful with how they're living or who they are. Now, when it comes to an active or an alcoholic or an addict or an alcoholic in active addiction, I, even again as one, see a lot of their behavior as disgraceful. Because it just is. Not even so much that I think they're a bad person, but they're lying and stealing and being super selfish and hurting other people and destroying things, destroying their own families, destroying other families. Having worked in social work for the amount of time I have, when I was working in child welfare, most of the clients I had, the parents I was working with, 95% of the time, they were alcoholics and addicts. And that was one of the main reasons for their behavior. However, knowing what they had done a lot of times, it was just like, ugh. Again, there's no one person who can empathize with them more, but it was still tough. And realizing that, these are things I either had done myself or were very close to doing. I truly mean this. I know I used to say this years and years ago with probably a fake humility. I could have killed someone. I truly believe that. I really, it is just by chance that some people had killed somebody drinking and driving and some people hadn't. And when you talk about, again, the idea of stigma of this seeing behaviors of the way people acting as a disgrace, like I said, it is disgraceful behavior. And what I'm not talking about is so much as, remember what I said about it's not the onus on somebody who's gay to destigmatize themselves. I think whether we know it or not, for alcoholics and addicts, it is on us to destigmatize ourselves. And I don't mean alcoholics or addicts as a whole. I just mean you in your life. Because it is much, much different for there not to be stigma on someone who's in recovery than someone who is in active addiction. And what I'm saying is, and again, a lot of people may think that the disease thing is you're just trying to absolve yourself of the stuff you did. And that's 100% not what I'm saying. Again, I felt totally a huge amount of shame and guilt for it. But, again, if you were talking about this is a person who's sick, we sure don't think like that. And when I say we, I mean society. And I don't even blame them. Again, this is not some self-loathing going on. I'm just being realistic. I was talking about the car, busting out the window and stuff like that. I use that as a small example, but there's big ones. I was in a relationship with someone who's addicted, and we both kind of did horrible things to each other. But even knowing them and loving them, I'm still really, really mad. They suffered from the same affliction I did, and I couldn't even contain that. And again, this is coming from a person who I think I'm very empathetic. And again, I'm in their shoes for reals. But when we're talking about the average person, the normal person, what helps destigmatize a lot is one of the best things beyond, social media, awareness campaigns, or, education or anything like that. The one thing that destigmatizes way more than any of those things is just somebody finding out that there's an alcoholic or an addict in their life, someone they love and care about. And I say finding out because everybody, at least in America, everybody knows one, whether you know it or not. But again, if that person is remaining in active addiction, if they can't stop being sick, and I use quotation marks because that's how society's probably going to look at it, if they can't stop being sick, then there's not a lot of sympathy. And and as far as stigma goes, when, again, people don't really, unless you're a real asshole, people don't really make fun of people in recovery. But if you're in active addiction, oh my God, there's whole, TikTok accounts and shit just for look at these crackheads are up to. I mean, there's tons of stuff. I'm not gonna lie, I've looked at some of them and laughed. Because, on some point, you have to admit some of this stuff is funny. But there's definitely a bunch of that. Again, because what I'm talking about when I talk about stigma, I'm talking about stigma for people in active addiction. Now, there are a lot of people that, they do understand that they are sick people, and a lot of these people are ones that work with them. But society as a whole, I guess I shouldn't say never, but man, it's my point of this video is to understand that if you are in active addiction, honestly, if you want to feel less stigma, there is a way for that. And if you're waiting for society to do that for you, I would not bet on that. Sincerely. I don't know. I made this video just because it's something I always thought of, and I thought it was an interesting thought, so, something to consider, because you talk about addiction and stigma a lot, and like I said, it certainly has gotten better, but it certainly also exists, and it's a lot better for people in recovery, but when you're still in active addiction, it's still there, and some people will even argue if it should be there. Like, you shouldn't feel good about yourself if you're actively participating in your addiction, so I don't know. Subscribe. I guess I got links for all sorts of stuff in the description. I'm done talking.